Forget all these social problems that Joker touched upon. Let's have a better woke agenda, and let's go full woke, and let's give Parasite.
From Marvel to Ghostbusters, there has never been a bigger time in history for family entertainment, with Hollywood releasing film after film. But somewhere along the way, the internet decided to start arguing about the politics of what are essentially children's movies. So where did we all go wrong? Well, today I'll tell the story of the movie wars. The original Ghostbusters movie, which was released in 1984, is widely regarded by film scholars and general audiences alike as one of the greatest and most iconic comedies of its era. The film's groundbreaking special effects, catchy theme song, and effortless chemistry between the main cast turned the story about a group of scientists starting a ghost extermination business into a juggernaut of popular culture for years to come. A sequel was released in 1989, which, while still being a big hit at the box office, failed to live up to the quality of the first movie in the eyes of most fans. Many agreed that the success of Ghostbusters was lightning in a bottle, and the magic simply could not be replicated. Nevertheless, fans still held out hope for a third film in the franchise. Potential scripts for Ghostbusters 3, some of which even written by series co-star Dan Aykroyd, were passed around for years, but were rejected time and time again by director Ivan Reitman and star Bill Murray. But following the death of series co-star Harold Ramis in 2014, most fans gave up on the idea of ever seeing the Ghostbusters franchise on the big screen again. But in Hollywood, it's impossible to leave a money-making property alone. The executives at Sony Pictures decided that, if they couldn't get the old cast and crew back, they would have to hire a new one. In 2015, it was announced that the next Ghostbusters film would be a complete reboot of the franchise. Paul Feig, most famous for his 2011 comedy Bridesmaids, was set to direct, but the detail most people focused on were the new lead actors. The previously male cast had been replaced by an all-female one, consisting of comedic actors Kristen Wiig, Melissa McCarthy, Kate McKinnon, and Leslie Jones. Now, at this point in time, it was hardly a novel concept for studios to change the gender or race of established characters. But even then, nobody could have predicted the explosion of outrage this announcement would ignite. Ghostbusters fans, who had waited for so long to see their favorite actors return to their iconic roles, had just had their dreams ripped away in an instant. This reboot became so widely talked about that even the Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump went to the internet to discuss his thoughts on the matter.
They're remaking Indiana Jones without Harrison Ford. You can't do that. And now they're making Ghostbusters with only women. What's going on?
Yes, this was shaping up to be an incredibly controversial movie before even a single frame of it had made it to the public. Sony evidently had a great deal of confidence in the production though, as they soon created Ghost Corps Inc., a subdivision production company which was to handle the creation of all future films in the Ghostbusters franchise. When Sony finally released a trailer in March of 2016, it did nothing to dispel audiences' unhappiness towards the film though. In fact, it was so controversial that it immediately achieved a near 50-50 ratio, with 12,000 likes and 13,800 dislikes. Just a few months later, it became the worst-rated movie trailer in YouTube's history, reaching over 1 million thumbs down. Following the backlash, Sony entered damage control mode in order to try to salvage the reputation of the reboot. Speculations emerged that the studio was deleting negative comments posted below the trailer, which some people were even able to demonstrate in real time. As the infamy of Ghostbusters continued to grow, many big media outlets decided to rush to Sony's defense. The primary talking point quickly became that everyone who disliked the trailer was a misogynistic man-child nerd. For the next few months, a stream of articles were published lambasting those who were not excited for the upcoming reboot. They all repeated the same talking points about how the backlash was completely overblown and the only reason anybody may have disliked the trailer was because they hated women. On May 17th, the YouTuber James Rolfe, best known for his character, the angry video game nerd, posted a video saying that he would not be making a review of the Ghostbusters reboot when it was released, essentially turning him into the poster child for an angry man-baby Ghostbusters fan in the eye of many journalists.
So instead of doing what everybody else is going to do, go see the movie and then talk about how bad it is, I'm going to do something different, something unheard of. I'm not going to see it. Wow. What a novel concept, right? If you already know you're going to hate it, why give them your money?
One of the higher profile people to join in was comedian Patton Oswalt, who went to Twitter and mocked the internet critic. This response provoked hordes of angry Ghostbusters fans to descend upon the actor, who were up in arms about his flippant response to Rolfe's video. Some of these people chose to make things personal. They photoshopped pictures of Oswalt's late wife, who had passed away only a month prior, onto the face of Slimer, with others asking if she was playing a ghost in the movie. Even the cast of the film got in on the action, joking in interviews about how detractors of their upcoming film were all neckbeards living in their mother's basements. Even the cast of the original movie came to the defense of the reboot. Bill Murray, who had famously been the main reason as to why there had never been a Ghostbusters 3, expressed his confidence in the actresses who had taken his place.
Why was this idea appealing to you?
It was only because I knew these girls were funny.
Many people were skeptical of his reasoning here, as a leaked email from the head of Sony's legal department in 2014 showed that the studio had considered aggressive litigation against the actor in the past if he refused to play ball on future Ghostbusters projects. With all the discourse surrounding it, one might have expected the reboot to become the biggest movie of the summer, with half the audience going to experience what they expected to be a train wreck and the other half going to support the women who had been targeted by trolls. However, upon its release, Ghostbusters only managed to rake in $229 million worldwide, not even reaching the $300 million that Sony had previously stated they would need to break even. Critics of the film lambasted its bland special effects, drawn-out scenes of improvised comedy, and overly saturated colors. Once it became clear that Ghostbusters 2016 would not become the cinematic universe starter Sony had hoped it would be, a few members of the cast from the original movie began speaking out on their thoughts as to where the studio went wrong. Dan Aykroyd placed blame on the director, Paul Feig, for not taking his advice on filming important scenes, and thus costing the studio millions in reshoots when it became clear that those shots were necessary for the plot.
It's too bad. The director, he spent too much on it, and he didn't shoot scenes we suggested to him. Several scenes that were going to be needed, and he said, no, we don't need them. And then we tested the movie, and they needed them, and he had to go back, and about 30 to 40 million in reshoots, so yeah. Wow. So he will not be back on the Sony line anytime soon.
However, Aykroyd would later walk back this statement. In the aftermath, the film's co-lead, Leslie Jones, began receiving a barrage of hateful comments on Twitter, many of which targeted her based on race. The most aggressive of these posts would compare the actress to the original Ghostbusters TV show from 1975, in which one of the team members was a gorilla. Among those taunting her was the infamous right-wing provocateur Milo Yiannopoulos. He would join in on making fun of her appearance, and even fabricated fake tweets by the comedian to make it seem like she was anti-Semitic. Throughout all of this, he would show no remorse, and rationalized his behavior because, quote, everyone gets hate mail. This eventually resulted in Jack Dorsey stepping in and Milo's Twitter account being suspended permanently. While his fans did start up a campaign dubbed Free Milo in an attempt to get him reinstated, Twitter upheld the ban. One of his defenders was YouTube commentator Shuanhead, who claimed Milo's statements weren't that hateful.
Yeah, you can't control your followers, and his tweets weren't hateful at all, really. They were just... Oh, he did imply that she was a man, but...
She looks like a man.
She looks...
That's
she's
not
ugly.
racist.
She's just ugly.
Following this, Jones' website was hacked and defaced with photos of her driver's license and nude images which had been stolen from her iCloud account. It's not clear if the hackers did this in response to Milo's ban from Twitter, but given the timing, most people believe the two events were connected. It was at this point that the vitriol surrounding Ghostbusters 2016 hit its peak and began to die down somewhat. Both those who loved and hated the films seemed to agree that things had gone too far. While this may have been the end of the story for female Ghostbusters, it wouldn't be long until the internet found a whole new target to get outraged at. In the mid-2010s, Warner Brothers had gone all in on their DC Extended Universe film franchise in an attempt to compete with Disney's Marvel Cinematic Universe. Among the movies in their lineup was Wonder Woman, directed by Patty Jenkins, and starring Gal Gadot as the titular heroine. Many news outlets took note of the significance of this, as it was the first comic book movie from a major studio to feature both a female protagonist and director. One might expect this to cause another online scuffle, but the film was actually well received by all parties, with no one accusing it of being SJW propaganda. But while the film itself did nothing to provoke such controversy, a third party would come in and throw a wrench into things. You see, in celebration of the diversity on display, the Alamo Drafthouse Theater in Austin, Texas announced that they would be hosting a screening of Wonder Woman which only women would be admitted to. Other Alamo Drafthouse locations across the country soon followed suit, with the Brooklyn Theater writing on their social media,
"Apologies, gentlemen, but we're embracing our girl power and saying no guys allowed for several special shows at the Alamo downtown Brooklyn. And when we say women and people who identify as women only, we mean it. So lasso your geeky girlfriends together and grab your tickets to this celebration of one of the most enduring and inspiring characters ever created."
As can be expected, this announcement caused quite a stir online. The news quickly spread like wildfire as people from all corners of the web chimed in with their opinions. Supporters of the idea claimed that it wasn't a big deal. It was simply one screening of a movie that would be shown thousands of times across every theater in the country. Meanwhile, detractors claimed that the supporters were being hypocritical. As if it had been an all-male screening of the film, surely everyone would have been crying discrimination. Unlike with Ghostbusters, it seemed like this controversy was good for business, as many of these screenings were selling out. At least, that's how it started. It wasn't long until two people, including law professor Stephen Clark, came along and filed formal complaints to the city of Austin against the theater chain. Alamo Drafthouse had apparently not taken into account that Austin's equality laws did not allow businesses to refuse service based on race, gender, or sexual orientation. The theater chain was forced to make a statement claiming that, despite their advertising, they would not have actually turned away men who showed up for the screenings. The case was later settled out of court, with the men who filed complaints receiving free copies of Wonder Woman on DVD. Unrelated, Alamo Drafthouse would later file for bankruptcy in 2021 in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, with the Austin location closing its doors permanently. In 2012, the Walt Disney Company purchased Lucasfilms, owners of the uber-popular Star Wars franchise, for over $4 billion. Clearly, Disney hoped to make an enormous profit with this new acquisition as they quickly set to work announcing a tidal wave of new Star Wars content. Chief among these was the confirmation of a new trilogy of films which would reunite the fan-favorite characters of the original movies with a newer, younger cast. The first of these motion pictures, titled The Force Awakens, was an incredible success, earning over $2 billion at the box office. The film received its fair share of criticism, but despite this, the majority of the audience agreed that the movie was a fun crowd pleaser, and they eagerly awaited the next installment. 2 years later in 2017, Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi was released in theaters, and fans poured in to see how writer and director Rian Johnson would continue the story set up by J.J. Abrams. However, after watching the film, there were many who were not satisfied with what they got. Even though most of the negativity was directed at Johnson, the film's cast also received abuse. Kelly Marie Tran, who played Rose in the film, received a slew of angry comments from people claiming her character ruined the movie, and many of these messages were racially charged. After months of hate, Tran deleted her Instagram account in June of 2018. This was not the first time a new Star Wars actor had left the internet following a wave of abuse. A couple years prior, trans co-star Daisy Ridley had deleted all of her social media due to criticism of her character Rey. This was the major factor which caused a large number of people to begin to point the finger at these fans and accuse them of being sexist. Because of this, the Star Wars fanbase gained a very negative reputation from journalists, and a massive rift was created between those who loved the new content Disney was creating and those who despised it. It didn't help that many of the people involved in the production weren't happy with the direction taken either. Mark Hamill, the actor behind Luke Skywalker, reportedly told Rian Johnson during filming, "I pretty much fundamentally disagree with every choice you've made for this character."
Luke would never say that. I'm sorry. Well, in this version, see, I'm talking about the George Lucas Star Wars. This is the next generation of Star Wars, so I almost had to think of Luke as another character. Maybe he's Jake Skywalker. He's not my Luke Skywalker.
Hamill would later go on to state that he regretted this comment, but those who hated The Last Jedi used it as proof that Disney was destroying the legacy of the original films. In June of 2018, a website was created named RemakeTheLastJedi.com. The creators of this site asked fans to send in pledges which would then be sent to Disney and Lucasfilm in order to fund a complete ground-up remake of the motion picture.
This is a campaign to provide Disney an opportunity to course correct with the Star Wars franchise. The fans are completely divided, and the core goal of Star Wars has been abandoned. The goal is not to make one half of the fandom happy over the other, it is to make a film that the fandom in general, as a whole, enjoys.
This project was mocked by fans across the spectrum, ironically uniting both those who loved and hated The Last Jedi in ridiculing it. There were many who believed it to be nothing more than a scam, although the creators promised that the producers behind the project had already pledged to cover the budget. Even Rian Johnson made fun of it, sarcastically pleading on Twitter for them to go through with the film. Not surprisingly, the remake never ended up happening. The website has since been deleted, and the Twitter account has been inactive since March of 2021. Although even in their final tweet, they were claiming to still be moving forward with the project. All of the divisiveness surrounding The Last Jedi caused public interest in the Star Wars franchise to dip. Their next movie, Solo: A Star Wars Story, performed well below expectations, reportedly losing Disney around $77 million. This was not the only reason Solo failed, but the reception to The Last Jedi certainly didn't help. The character of Black Panther first appeared in the pages of Fantastic Four number 52 in 1966, created by comic book legends Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. The titular character went on to make history by becoming the first black character from a major comic publisher to star in his own solo title starting in 1977. Given Black Panther's relevance to the legacy of diversity at Marvel Comics, for years fans hotly anticipated the day he would receive his own feature film. Following the character's big screen debut in Captain America: Civil War in 2016, plans for a solo Black Panther movie were quickly set into motion over at Marvel Studios. Continuing in the legacy of the comics it was based on, Black Panther made history as the first big-budget comic book movie with both a black director and a predominantly black cast. As audiences purchased their tickets and crowded into theaters in February of 2018, there were some online who claimed white people should not see the film on opening weekend, as it was an experience only for African Americans. In response, trolls saw an opportunity to stir up panic at their expense. They went to Twitter and began posting pictures of injured individuals, usually white women, and claimed that they had been attacked by black people while going to see Black Panther, with the reason for the beating being that this was their movie. Unsurprisingly, these claims were false. One of the Twitter users even used a photo of former White House staffer Rob Porter's ex-wife, who just that month had gone public about the domestic abuse she suffered from her former spouse. In response to the growing hoax, a few people on the other side of the issue posted tweets claiming to have been assaulted at Black Panther screenings by people wearing MAGA hats and spewing racist insults. It should be noted that there were never any reports of actual assaults during Black Panther screenings, and any actual fear it may have caused was soon overshadowed by the film's earth-shattering success at the box office. Black Panther grossed $202 million in its opening weekend, and by the end of its run had earned over $1.3 billion worldwide. The fictional African nation of Wakanda awed viewers across the globe, many of whom left the theater believing it was a real location. A great deal of the film's characters and lines became instant staples of popular culture, not least of which being the famous Wakanda Forever salute. The gesture was almost immediately iconic, with the cast being asked to replicate it during interviews and press junkets constantly. Of course, with it becoming so widespread, it was bound to be misused. This brings us to September 18th, 2020. The day of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death, when Twitter user Alexandra Lee Capps went to the site to tell the story of how her daughter reacted to the news.
Just told my 10-year-old daughter about #RBG. She had tears in her eyes. Then she did the Wakanda pose and said #RuthKonda forever.
This tweet instantly went viral and was mocked by people across the political spectrum, with pretty much everyone denying that the interaction described had ever actually happened. Lee Capps soon deleted her post and her Twitter account, but it didn't stop the internet at large from continuing to laugh at her expense. In fact, the term RuthKonda is still used today as shorthand for people telling obviously fake stories about their children for attention on the internet. As Warner Brothers was looking through their old library of films that could be rebooted, one of the titles they decided to bring back was 2001's blockbuster heist film Ocean's 11. It was announced in 2015, around the same time as the Ghostbusters reboot. The new film would be a spin-off featuring an all-female cast. While the wheels began turning for both projects, production for Ocean's 8 was much slower. Perhaps the studio had been unnerved by the overwhelming backlash and underwhelming financial returns of Ghostbusters. The first trailer for the film did receive a significant amount of dislikes when it was released in December of 2017, but not to anywhere near the degree of Sony's fiasco. As the marketing campaign continued, there were some who complained about it being yet another female-centric retread of a previously male-driven film. Ocean's 8 was a moderate success at the box office when it premiered in June of 2018, making just over $297 million on a $70 million budget. Critical response was lukewarm at best. While most spoke of it positively, very few were offering glowing praise. Even though this lackluster rollout would have been brushed off by many filmmakers, a few members of the heist film's main cast, including Mindy Kaling, spoke about their frustration with the predominant amount of white cis men reviewing Ocean's 8.
If I had to base my career on what white men wanted, I would be very unsuccessful. So there is obviously an audience out there who want to watch things like Ocean's 8.
This again caused a small amount of controversy online, but it wasn't long before Ocean's 8 left the public consciousness as quickly as it had entered. Any anger people had toward it would soon be overshadowed by a movie cultural war that would put this minor skirmish to shame. In December of 2018, Disney released the trailer for Captain Marvel, the first MCU film to feature a woman in the lead role. People had mixed opinions on the character of Captain Marvel long before her movie was ever announced. After being debuted in the comics in 2012, she had become one of the prime examples used by those who disliked Marvel's increasing push for diversity in the 2010s. On the other hand though, there was also a large contingent of fans who loved the character. Needless to say, there was a lot of buzz surrounding the movie for various reasons. It didn't help that the first trailer seemed to put special emphasis on the gender of the title character, adding fuel to the fire in the detractors' case against the film. And most of this ire was focused on Captain Marvel's star, Brie Larson. This drama began back in June of 2018 during Larson's speech at the Women in Film Awards. She spoke about the recent critical failure of A Wrinkle in Time and her frustration about the lack of diversity amongst reviewers.
Am I saying that I hate white dudes? No, I'm not. But what I am saying is that if you make a movie that is a love letter to women of color, there is an insanely low chance a woman of color will have the chance to see your movie and review your movie.
This quote exploded online, with Larson's critics using it as absolute proof that she hated men and didn't want them seeing Captain Marvel. This expanded something of a new internet subculture, with YouTubers dedicating entire videos to discussing everything the actress did or said. Rumors were spread about how Larson's fellow Marvel cast members all hated her behind the scenes, and how Disney was allegedly already looking to recast her, although it should be noted that none of these claims have ever been confirmed. The most prominent of these channels was The Quartering, who has gone on to put Brie Larson in the title and thumbnail of over 100 uploads. Yes, people who hated Captain Marvel were proving to be an incredibly profitable demographic before the movie had even been released. In the time between Larson's speech and the motion picture's premiere, Captain Marvel's page on Rotten Tomatoes became a heated battleground. People bombarded the audience want to see rating, dropping it all the way down to a staggering 27%. In response, the review aggregate website chose to remove the want to see score altogether. As can be expected, this provoked outrage, but Rotten Tomatoes stood their ground. Around this time, another female-led action movie was being marketed titled Alita: Battle Angel. The film was a long-time passion project for director Robert Rodriguez, who was a fan of the original anime it was based on. More importantly for our purposes, Alita's release date was only a month separated from Captain Marvel's. Because of this, those who despise the upcoming Disney film decided to rally behind Robert's project, in the hopes of teaching Disney a lesson about not using gender identity politics to market a film, as well as hopefully curbing the mainstream narrative that they only hated Captain Marvel because they were sexist. When Alita: Battle Angel premiered in February of 2019, it made an impressive $405 million at the box office. Just as its supporters were celebrating victory though, Captain Marvel debuted a month later and grossed over $1 billion. However, the detractors did not consider this a defeat. They once again turned to Rotten Tomatoes, citing the disparate audience scores as proof that Alita had triumphed. It received 92% positive ratings, as opposed to Captain Marvel's score, which hovered around the mid-40 to low 60 range. But the real winner of all this was actually Disney. That month, they had purchased 20th Century Fox, the studio behind Alita: Battle Angel, meaning that they collected the money for both films and ended up laughing all the way to the bank. In 2008, Christopher Nolan released his critically acclaimed adaptation of Batman: The Dark Knight. The film was a massive success, basically redefining the way superhero movies were viewed by the general public overnight. The true breakout star of the movie, though, ended up being Heath Ledger's portrayal of the Joker. In the years that followed, the public perception of the character would evolve from a cheesy comic book villain to a symbol of those of us who are fed up with society. As popularity of the Joker continued to grow as an ironic meme representing unhinged gamers in the 2010s, Warner Bros. Decided to greenlight a motion picture for the Clown Prince of Crime. Todd Phillips, best known for the Hangover trilogy, was chosen to write and direct. Phillips' idea was to take heavy influence from the work of Martin Scorsese, and treat the film as an exploration of the Joker's place in modern pop culture, as a symbol for those of us who feel society has left behind. Of course, making a film with a sympathetic look at a mentally unwell white man seemed to be too much for many in the media to handle. Without even a trailer released yet, there were some who worried that the film was being made to appeal to far-right incels on the internet. These critics accused the movie of sympathizing with and glorifying violent killers, and would only serve to inspire more angry young men to become mass shooters. This backlash sparked a second backlash of those who like the character of the Joker. They claim these journalists were missing the whole point. The movie was meant to shine a mirror on the societal problems that drive people to violence in the first place. As these two parties argued back and forth for months, things had heated up significantly by the time the film was set to premiere in October of 2019. Articles started to be written stirring up fear that screenings would turn violent, as gun-wielding incels would turn out. It got so bad, in fact, that mere days before the premiere, the FBI released an alert, warning theatergoers to be aware of potential shootings at Joker screenings. While they had received no credible threats, they stated that some troubling social media posts gave cause for alarm. In preparation, a few theaters banned attendees from wearing Joker costumes, while others chose to simply not show the film at all. One of these theaters was the Century 16 in Aurora, Colorado, where in 2012 a gunman opened fire in a crowded showing of The Dark Knight Rises, killing 12 people. With all of the fears surrounding Joker from the mainstream media, one might assume that general audiences would be scared off from the theater upon its release. However, the opposite turned out to be true, as the film grossed a record $39 million in its opening weekend, going on to gross over $1 billion, making it the highest grossing R-rated film of all time. Joker was even nominated for Best Picture at that year's Academy Awards, although it ended up losing to the South Korean film Parasite. This was followed by a minor controversy when YouTuber Robert Storms uploaded a video ranting about how Joker should have won the award, and believed Parasite only beat it due to Hollywood's quote-unquote woke agenda.
Let's talk about Joker. Okay, look at United States of America right now. What is more important to our culture than the Joker? About a movie that talks about mental illness not being taken seriously, about how people in high places look down and frown upon the poor, the poverty, and people with mental illness, and how we need to take this more serious. But no, forget all these social problems that Joker touched upon. Let's have a better woke agenda, and let's go full woke, and let's give Parasite.
This video made the rounds online and was mocked by all sides of the political spectrum. Storm would later go on to delete the upload, but its reputation lives on in infamy to this very day. As the streaming wars raged on throughout the second half of the 2010s, Netflix fought desperately to retain their status as the top platform. They traveled to film festivals all over the world to purchase the exclusive streaming rights to the most critically praised movies. In August of 2020, the trailer for a French film by the name of Cuties was posted to their social media. The movie was about a group of preteen girls who started a dance troupe and began performing in a provocative style, and the internet took notice. The very first poster released by Netflix, which featured children wearing revealing clothing and standing in sexualized poses, sparked an immense backlash. This was not helped when people saw the film's official description on the streaming platform.
Amy, 11, becomes fascinated with a twerking dance crew. Hoping to join them, she starts to explore her femininity, defying her family's traditions.
People claimed Netflix was sexually exploiting young girls in order to market their film, and there were mass calls for the streaming giant to remove Cuties from its upcoming slate of releases. For their part, the streaming juggernaut was quick to issue a statement on the situation.
We're deeply sorry for the inappropriate artwork that we used for Cuties. It was not okay, nor was it representative of this French film, which premiered at Sundance. We've now updated the pictures and description.
Even with this statement, the damage was already done. Petitions were started for people to cancel their Netflix subscriptions. #CancelNetflix was the top trending hashtag on Twitter for several days, and even American politicians were joining in. Missouri Senator Josh Hawley published an open letter addressed to the streaming platform, asking why they chose to market Cuties the way they did and to release proof that the child actors were safe while on set. Hawaiian Representative Tulsi Gabbard explicitly referred to the film as CP and pedobait. Texas Senator Ted Cruz sent a request to the Department of Justice to have Netflix investigated for the production of child abuse material. Things got so bad, in fact, that in October of 2020, Netflix was indicted by a grand jury in Tyler County, Texas, for promoting visual material which depicts the lewd exhibition of the genitals or public area of a clothed or partially clothed child who was younger than 18 years of age, and that the film has no serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. Netflix stood firm behind their movie, saying in a statement,
Cuties is a social commentary against the sexualization of young children. This charge is without merit, and we stand by the film.
In the wake of the Epstein scandal, and with outrage on this scale, one might expect Cuties to finally be a movie which united the whole world in hating it, since it did in fact show scantily clad prepubescent girls performing sexually provocative dance routines. Many journalists came out in support of the French film, stating that critics were missing the point, and that the story was actually a condemnation of the sexualization of children in the media. Those who hated the movie fired back, stating even if that was the director's intent, the message became nullified when she showed actual children dancing provocatively on screen. Nevertheless, these journalists stood firm, some even blaming the backlash on right-wing hate mobs. There were a few people who noticed the interesting parallels between this controversy and the one surrounding Joker a year prior. In that instance, the public claimed that journalists were misinterpreting the film, as it was criticizing everything they claimed it promoted. In the case of Cuties, the tables had turned, as journalists defended the film from the public on the same basis. Eventually, even though they publicly stood by Cuties, Netflix realized what a disaster they had on their hands. In the time leading up to and following the motion picture's release, they took multiple steps to suppress it on their platform. They removed it from their coming soon section, and barred it from showing up under search terms such as cute. These efforts seemed to have helped, and eventually people did move on and forget about Cuties. The film remains viewable on Netflix to this day, but the streaming giant clearly hopes to move past the incident. As the Hollywood reboot train continued full speed ahead, its next target was the 1970s TV show Charlie's Angels. Directed by Elizabeth Banks and distributed by Sony Pictures, it seemed as though the studio hadn't learned their lesson after the chaos surrounding their last female-led action film. In an interview prior to its release, Banks put the gender of her main cast front and center, seemingly trying to guilt people into watching it.
Look, people have to buy tickets to this movie too. This movie has to make money. If this movie doesn't make money, it reinforces a stereotype in Hollywood that men don't go see women do action movies. They'll go and see a comic book movie with Wonder Woman and Captain Marvel because that's a male genre. So even though those are movies about women, they put them in the context of feeding the larger comic book world. So it's all about, yes, you're watching a Wonder Woman movie, but we're setting up 3 other characters or we're setting up Justice League.
Unsurprisingly, this comment generated backlash. Those who disagreed with what Banks had to say claimed she contradicted herself in her own statement, referencing other recent action movies starring women which had performed incredibly well. They believed the director was trying to downplay those other successes in order to make her film seem more important by comparison. When Charlie's Angels debuted, its subpar performance at the box office during opening weekend caused Sony to deem it a failure. While the loss and controversy surrounding it were nowhere near as bad as Ghostbusters, many still made the comparison between the two films. As the 2010s ended, it seemed as though this sort of outrage marketing for female-led movies was dying down. Around the same time, the film Black Christmas was trying something similar, advertising itself as a Me Too era reboot of another property from the 1970s. But in that case, the bait had not been taken because no one cared. Following the massive success of The Jungle Book in 2016, the Walt Disney Company began a binge of remaking their entire catalog of old cartoons in live action. This strategy was already controversial amongst critics and audiences, many of whom believed them to just be hollow and soulless retreads of the original classics. But one would end up sparking a greater firestorm than all the rest: the remake of 1998's Mulan. This all began amidst the protests in Hong Kong due to concerns that the region's independence from the Chinese government would soon erode. As time went on and clashes between police and demonstrators became increasingly violent, the protests became international news. Many onlookers in the West sympathized with those fighting to keep their freedom, and it was around this time that they took notice of the reluctance of many American corporations to speak out against the Chinese Communist Party. Ire became directed at Disney when it was discovered that Liu Yifei, the star of the upcoming Mulan remake, had publicly spoken out in favor of the police in Hong Kong.
I also support Hong Kong police. You can beat me up now. What a shame for Hong Kong.
This statement enraged both protesters in Hong Kong and their supporters overseas, who all called for a mass boycott. Disney, for the most part, tried their best to avoid addressing the situation altogether, as they did not want to disturb the massive Chinese film market or risk their relationship with the Chinese government. Jason T. Reed, a producer on the movie, gave a public statement in an attempt to calm things down.
It's a very complicated situation for performers who live in China and work in China. Obviously, the tensions between the two entities is very complicated. I feel badly for her that the conversation inevitably turns to this, and I hope that when audiences see the movie, that the conversation turns back to what an amazing performance she brought in and how much she had to do in order to bring that character to life.
Needless to say, this did not quell the discourse, but Disney stood their ground and did not release the actress from the project. However, Mulan was still facing problems behind the scenes as the COVID-19 pandemic forced them to delay its release in theaters. Eventually, though, they realized they had another option. Rather than showing it in cinemas, they could instead premiere it on their Disney Plus streaming service at a premium rental price of $30. But Disney was not out of the woods just yet. With the film now viewable, audiences noticed something interesting. In the special thanks section of the credits, one of the names listed was the publicity department of the CPC Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region Committee, a Chinese government entity which has detained over 1 million Uyghur Muslims and placed them in concentration camps. People were once again outraged over this, citing Disney's hypocrisy as a supposed champion for diversity and inclusion while also allying with people accused of heinous actions. The company again avoided commenting on the issue, and due to its release on a streaming service, it's unclear exactly how well Mulan performed. But it's probably safe to say that this is an incident the entertainment juggernaut would rather you forget. After the release of their earth-shatteringly successful cinematic film Avengers Endgame, Marvel Studios wanted the world to know they were nowhere near done just yet. They set to work announcing an avalanche of upcoming projects, many of which featuring new characters who would serve as the next generation of Marvel heroes on screen. One of these projects was Eternals, based on the Jack Kirby comic from 1976, about a group of immortal godlike beings. The detail that really got people's attention was that it was to be directed by Chloe Zhao. The Disney marketing machine was putting a lot of hype into Eternals. It seemed as though they wanted the public to look at it as a prestige film rather than another fun popcorn action movie. One of the main details they emphasized was that it was being shot in real locations rather than entirely in front of a green screen like most other Marvel projects at the time. They also made sure to emphasize that it would be the first MCU film to feature a scene of two characters being intimate. It seemed general audiences weren't taking the bait though, and hype for the film amongst anyone who wasn't a Marvel diehard was low in the months leading up to its release. There were some media organizations who chose to interpret the lack of excitement for Eternals as bigotry against its diverse cast. However, unlike previous examples of similar claims being made, these did not create much controversy. Perhaps people had become tired of this sort of discourse online, or maybe they simply didn't have strong enough feelings towards Eternals to expend their energy on it. There was also the matter of the film featuring the first gay kiss in a Marvel movie. As is the case with most projects produced by Disney, the scene was cut for international releases of the film in countries in which homosexuality was much more taboo. When Eternals debuted in theaters, it only managed to gross slightly over $402 million globally. While this is a lot of money, it's still an underperformance, especially by Marvel standards. In the years following Sony's Ghostbusters fiasco in 2016, the studio spent that time trying to figure out what to do next with the film franchise. Clearly, a complete reboot with an entirely new cast wasn't what the audiences wanted. Their solution was a back-to-basics approach, bringing together the old cast and making the story take place after the events of Ghostbusters 2, following the descendants of the original team. The film was officially announced in July of 2019, with Jason Reitman, the son of the original movie's director Ivan Reitman, set to direct. As with most movies around this time, its production and release experienced multiple delays due to the COVID-19 pandemic. With this extra time, there were some who expressed outrage, accusing Sony of bending the knee to sexists and racists who raged against the 2016 film. Some news outlets set their sight on Jason Reitman after he did a podcast where he promised to quote-unquote hand the movie back to the fans. They argued that the people who hated Paul Feig's Ghostbusters were no fans at all, and were just bigots who didn't want to see minorities enter their spaces. The online world braced itself, waiting for the typhoon of anger to begin all over again. But things remained relatively calm. There were arguments, of course, but nowhere near the level of 2016. It seemed as though the internet simply couldn't be bothered to go through all of that drama again over a movie for children. There were those who were excited and those who weren't, and it didn't go much further than that. When Ghostbusters Afterlife finally released in November of 2021, it ended up grossing slightly over $204 million at the global box office, falling slightly behind 2016's $229 million. The thing is, due to COVID restrictions, its higher domestic gross, and Afterlife's much lower budget, this was enough for Sony to consider the film a financial success. After the motion picture's theatrical run, Sony soon announced the Ghostbusters Ultimate Blu-ray Collection, containing copies of Ghostbusters 1, 2, and Afterlife. While many fans were excited for this, some were quick to point out one glaring omission: Ghostbusters 2016. Chief among them was none other than Paul Feig himself, who went to Twitter to ask Sony why his film wasn't included in the collection, despite the answer being obvious to onlookers. Eventually, the studio caved, and added a digital copy of the movie to the box set to appease the feminist comedy director. So there you have a half-decade of time that I think perfectly encapsulates the modern-day movie wars. And if there's a moral to any of this, it's that if there's something to be fought about on the internet, it will probably be fought about on the internet. And with that, I think I'll end the video here. So until next time, thanks for watching.